Skarbrand was once the greatest of all Khorne's demons, but now he roams the realms as a being of purest rage and destruction. How will he fare against the Absolute? Let's get him a Baldur's Gate 3 build and find out. As always, we're starting in the character creator, and as always, we're using Total War as reference. For his race, we're going with Tieflings. These are the closest approximation we have in-game to demons, since they're descended from devils, and most importantly, are very red. All Tieflings have a standard movement range, dark vision, and resistance to fire damage. So subrace, whilst Asmodeus do look the most red out of the box, Zariel is a lot more fitting, since his devils are the most powerful martially and can make use of fire and intimidation to get what they need. As for visuals, he's a big red demon, but since we can't really get much into the demonic look, we're going to have to take some creative liberties and just do our best. The features we can pull across are his blue and yellow eyes, large horns, and hair starting a dark red and ending with a fiery yellow. I also threw in a nasty scar to give me a bit more of a war-ravaged look, and that's about as close as I think I can get with the tools provided. For a little backstory, as I said, he was once the greatest of all Khorne's demons, and one of the greatest fighters any of the realms had ever seen. So great in fact that he believed that he could rival Khorne himself, the literal god of blood and violence. One day when Khorne had his back to Skarbrand, not sure how a god actually does that, he went in for the kill and unleashed a mighty blow which would have razed cities to the ground in a single swing, but only succeeded in creating the tiniest of scratches on the armor of the blood god. Khorne obviously wasn't best pleased with this and grabbed the demon by the throat before tossing him back into the realms of chaos. The choking on the throw resulted in Skarbrand being stripped of all personality and being reduced to an unending rage and desire for raw destruction. And that brings us nicely to his class, where we're obviously going for a pure berserker. There's not enough thought in his head for any sort of strategy or teamwork, so the class, which is all about charging into combat head first to deal as much damage as possible, is obviously the way to go. At level 1, this grants us access to Rage, which allows us to work ourselves into a Rage to deal more damage in melee, whenever using improvised melee weapons and throwing attacks. This lasts 10 turns as long as we make an attack or take damage each turn, and we can't use any spells when raging, which works just fine for us, since Khorne hates magic. We also gain unarmored defense, which allows us to add our constitution modifier to our armor class when wearing no armor, but you're going to find out that we're not really going to make much use of this. As for his background, I was a little bit stuck here since he's literally a demon created by magic to destroy things, but in the end the one which fit best was the soldier, since he technically was a soldier in the army of Khorne. This gains us athletics and survival skills, both of which fit perfectly. For ability points, I first nuked intelligence and wisdom down to the minimum, since there's not much thought in his head apart from destroy, and we are avoiding magic at all costs. Strength is obviously being maxed out at 17, since we're going to rely on that for pretty much everything we can during the game. Dex is 14 to keep him agile enough to dodge attacks, Constitution is 16 for supreme tankiness, and Charisma is 10, which is almost certainly too high. Feel free to roast me in the comments, but allow me to metagame for a moment and say having super low Charisma makes the game needlessly difficult and locks you out of a lot of things, since a lot of events hinge on you being at least passable in conversation. Besides, just stick to intimidation and violence and you're all good. You can avoid using persuasion and deception just fine. Finally, for the skills, we don't really have a lot of choice here. Intimidation is fine, like I just said, but the rest of these options don't make a whole lot of sense, so I just went with Perception to give him some awareness of his surroundings, even if he is dumb as a rock. With all that sorted, let's get into his gear and playstyle. Believe it or not, looking at Skarbrand in Total War, but this lad is decently armoured with what I'm going to call medium armour stats, basically so I can still use the Berserker class while I'm using it. There is a slight downside that all medium armour is pretty covering, so I'm going to have to do the best I can with some chainmail and dies to keep the style of his Warhammer armour as best I can. He also has gauntlets and boots, if you could call them that, so we'll match these with dies too to get this black and red thing going on. Moving over to weaponry, and we're going with dual wield axes. To start off with, you'll only be able to use 2 of these smaller hand axes, but by level 4, spoilers for the build, we can pick up something bigger and keep the damage coming thick and fast while looking like a Berserker warrior of Khorne. Having no ranged option is traditional, but if you want to take something for convenience, then go right ahead. I went for a dart since it makes the most sense in a selection of options which make none. As for playstyle outside of combat, I think it's fairly straightforward. This lad is literally the embodiment of mindless rage and violence, so anything you can do to cause destruction, terror and mayhem, then absolutely do it. Now lore-wise, you're probably going to want to burn everything to the ground equally, rather than aligning yourself with either side of the conflict going on in Faerun. But in the interest of giving you people to talk to and an actual game to play outside of raw combat, I'd suggest you take the side of the Absolute, and we'll just say this is Skarbrand's way of trying to get into the good books of at least one deity. So raise everything pure and good to the ground in the name of evil and fire. Happy hunting. As for companions, this is another one where it makes the most sense for him to be a one-man army, but if you want to make things easier, which I don't blame you for, I'd go for those which align with his pure violence and evil at all cost motto. And the closest you can get to this are probably Minthara, Karlach and Astarion. Yes, I know, a lot of these guys, they have some morals, and they don't line up exactly, but this is the best we got. It's not my fault that Skarbrand has basically no redemption arc, and everyone else in this game is a complex character that does. This game's brilliant, if I haven't said enough already. And if it wasn't clear enough, no magic for anyone. Khorne hates magic and sees it as a cheat, so avoid it at all costs. As for gummy worms, I'm a little bit on the fence. I don't think he'd have anything against them, but I'm also not sure if he'd have the ability to understand what they do and decide whether to use them or not. So feel free to go whichever way you like, as it makes about as much sense as the other. If you really want me to give a yes or no, probably avoid, since it is technically a form of magic, and as we just said, Con hates that. And with that, we can get into the very simple leveling up. As I said, we're sticking to Barbarian for all of our levels, since Skarbrand really is an all-out fighter, without any spells or abilities outside of hitting things very, very, very hard. So at level 2, we gain Danger Sense and Reckless Attack. Danger Sense gives us advantage on dexterity saving throws against traps, spells and surfaces, making roaming around the world far easier. And Reckless Attack gives us an advantage on attack rolls, but enemies have an advantage versus you. Now this doesn't really matter about enemies having an advantage against us, since taking damage to maintain rage is exactly what you want to do, so feel free to use this whenever you want. Level 3, we gain another charge of rage and the Searing Smite racial action, allowing us to deal some spicy fire damage once per long rest and apply some damage over time. We can also pick up a subclass, and while it may be the most basic option, Berserker really is the best fit here. The Path of Untrammeled Fury, great word by the way, Blood and Violence is pretty much the title of Skarbrand's autobiography. So with this, our rage becomes a frenzy, granting us the Frenzied Strike and Enraged Throw abilities, as well as allowing us to make improvised weapon attacks as a bonus action, which basically means grabbing the nearest thing or creature and hitting an enemy with it. Frenzied Strike is the same as a normal melee attack, but can be used as a bonus action. An Enraged Throw is an enhanced throw which deals extra damage and can knock targets prone. At level 4, we gain our first feat, and I'm going straight for Dual Wielder. This allows us to use all non-heavy weapons while dual wielding, letting us upgrade from hand axes to battle axes for some extra heft and damage. We also now gain a +1 to armor class whilst dual wielding, making us just a little bit tankier, which can't be a bad thing. Level 5, we gain an extra attack per turn and increased movement range when not wearing heavy armor, both of which will come in useful in the all-out assault playstyle. At level 6, we grab another charge of rage and the Mindless Rage passive, meaning we can no longer be charmed, frightened, or calmed when in a rage, boiling down to being just a little bit more unstoppable. At level 7, we pick up the Feral Instinct passive, which gives us a +3 bonus to initiative and makes us immune to being surprised, meaning we're almost always one of the first in line to be taking our action in combat. Level 8 is another feat, and this time we're going with Savage Attacker, allowing us high chance of dealing high damage when we land a melee attack. Level 9, we gain the Brutal Critical passive, allowing us to deal additional damage whenever we land a crit, adding up to some pretty insane damage numbers if we get lucky. Level 10, we pick up the Intimidating Presence action, which allows us to frighten a target's enemy. Level 11, we pick up a Relentless Rage passive, which gives us the ability to resist being downed once per short rest. And finally, at level 12, we grab our final feat, and I'm going with Mage Slayer. Skarbrand and Khorne in general despise magic in all forms, so it's a perfect fit thematically. It gives him an advantage to resist spells cast on him in melee range, and allows him to reply with a melee attack whenever a spell is cast within his melee range. As well as this, anything he hits has a disadvantage on concentration saving throws, so focusing mages as this guy can shut them down completely. In his final form, he is a ferocious battler with the potential to deal devastating amounts of damage with his dual axes and multiple attacks per turn, which only get better once he gets into a frenzy. As well as this, he works great as a frontlines tank with a good chunk of health and decent armor class to keep him safe whilst he stokes up damage for the team. Once he gets into combat, just throw him in as deep as you can and have him wail on enemies until there's nothing left but a pile of gore and skulls. Skulls which you can then use to make a lovely chair. That's just about everything I have for this Skarbrand build in Baldur's Gate 3. Leave in the comments down below of any other builds that you want to see. Doesn't have to be Warhammer, can be anything you want. So if you want Grandpa Simpson or King Kong from the hit game Skull Island Rise of Kong, feel free to let me know. Like, subscribe, and if you want more Baldur's Gate 3 content, then check out this video here to see my Lithan Art build.